So moving over to video number 2 now. So another one of you says, but you're similar to me on the social anxiety side in that in structured environments and where you know what someone will be talking about and you know how long we'll be talking for, I can be very talkative and social. They're usually way too talkative. Yeah, I have that problem. I'm a bit of a motor mouth sometimes. I have to kind of control myself not to talk too much. But when things are unstructured and open-ended, I struggle. I struggle with eye contact, and I used to think it was a social anxiety thing. With hindsight, this is a silly conclusion, in my case, because I also don't make eye contact with TV characters where there is no social interaction involved. And you find eye contact uncomfortable and distracting. Yes, I do as well. So another one of you says that monotropism is one attempt at a theory that does attempt to explain social, sensory and focus-related traits from a common cause. Yes, I've heard of monotropism before, and this is the idea that autistics sort of have tunnel vision, can only sort of focus on one thing at a time. And this idea that might tie together the different issues, because I suppose like in a social setting, you know, part of the reason why I might struggle to make eye contact and listen to the person at the same time is because they're like two lots of sensory information, or even more actually, because you're also having to look at the person's face and lots of other things. So it can be easier to sort of look down or not to look at them in order to give your total attention to what they're saying. It's this idea you struggle to like disperse your attention, and that would also might explain, yeah, like sensory issues as well. You know, that you find, you know, you might be really distracted by a noise and you can't switch your attention off from that noise. You can't distribute your attention as to where it's needed to be. You can only focus on this really distracting stimulus. Whereas like a non-autistic person will be able to not focus on it. Their attention isn't a singular. They can shift their attention to what they need to do, and the noise or whatever, it would just become part of the background and they can kind of like forget about it or habituate to it. As an autistic would really struggle to do that. And then that would also tie into like, you know, getting hyper-focused on an area of interest and things like that, or being or having like lots of things all cluttered and dumped all over the place, because it could just be so hard to kind of distribute your attention, you know, and you might be just kind of very hyper focused on one task and then you neglect other things. So yeah, I mean it's certainly a plausible theory, but I think it just needs to be tested more. And also, of course, bearing in mind, remember that autism can affect people in very different ways. You know, would this theory explain every single autistic experience? That's the question, really. I mean, it does make sense to me. I mean, maybe it's like, again, one of these kind of... but yeah, I suppose it does. Monotropism attempts to explain autism at the kind of attentional level, like where you place your attention. It's sort of like an attentional theory, really. How would this explain the high rate of ADHD in autism as well? Because many autistic people have ADHD or high traits of ADHD, and some people with ADHD like to do different things all at once, like you know, like I know some people with ADHD, like when they're watching TV, like to kind of also look at their phone or whatever, because they can't just focus on one thing. So how would monotropism explain that? Do autistic people with ADHD appear different to someone who just has ADHD on their own and stuff like that? Would monotropism affect how ADHD is expressed in autistic people? That sort of thing. Those are questions I'd be interested in for them to find out. Anyway, so your next comment, one of you says that it's plausible. You think it's plausible that autism has several underlying causes. It reminds me a bit of epilepsy, which is defined by chronic seizures, but has a variety of presentations, such as tonic-clonic seizures, absent seizures, and various levels of frequency. caused by a variety of reasons, such as injury, disease, etc. Another comment now. One of you says that the social model does not deny the existence of impairment, it just advances the idea that impairment, for example a low IQ, excessive height, is a distinct phenomenon from being disabled, and that disability is defined as being less able to participate in society. Yeah, so I get what you're saying. So basically, my understanding is that so advocates of a social model will draw a distinction between impairment, which is what the person is born with, what that which belongs to the person, if you like. For example, having a low IQ, maybe not being able to see very well, depending on what the impairment is. In autism, struggling to socialise properly. Impairment, would be what the person brings into the world, sort of like a biological kind of deficit, if you like. I'm not going to shy away from using a language because I like proper language, and that's what it is after all. Biological deficit or disorder. And then they would say that this is different to the disability. The idea being that the person is disabled when this impairment stops them from being able to access society, and then according to the social model, they can then get rid of it. They can then kind of mitigate the disability by providing accommodations, such as a ramp being the most obvious example in the case of someone who's in a wheelchair, that then the person's disability will be very much reduced, and some would say they could even get rid of the disability. I think that's far-fetched, but that's kind of what the social model argues. They say that the disability is when a person can't access society because of their impairment. So in other words, a social model theorist would say that the impairment itself doesn't disappear. The person is still impaired, but their disability can be reduced or even completely overcome if society provides accommodations so that the person can then access society equally with on the same terms as other people. You're quite right. Most advocates of the social model do not deny the existence of impairment. That said, I have come across some people in the neurodiversity movement who do deny the existence of impairment, but again, that comes back down to the fact that the neurodiversity movement is very broad and covers many different perspectives. But yes, certainly the social model never set out to deny the existence of impairment. But I do take issue with this idea that impairment and disability are technically dissociable. I personally don't really agree with that argument. I know that's what the social model argues, I just don't agree with it. I can only come at it from my own embodied experience as an impaired person who's also disabled, but I can say that the very reason I am disabled is precisely because of my impairment. I'm not disabled, in my case, I'm not just disabled because of a lack of accommodation. The social model would argue that I'm only disabled because of a lack of accommodation, and that you give me the right support, you give me everything I need, the impairment will be there still, but I'd no longer be disabled. To me, I'd still be disabled because there are certain things that I'm never going to be able to access because of my impairment. So, I'm never going to be able to experience certain things. I'm never going to be able to connect with people in a way I might want to be able to connect with them. I'm never going to be able to raise a family. I mean, I don't know if I'd want a family, but the fact is the choice has been taken away from me anyway because I wouldn't be able to do it anyway, so I don't know what I would choose if I didn't have autism. But all I'm saying is certain things I'll never be able to experience, and I've had to accept that and come to terms with it and just make peace with it because, because I can't connect with people and I don't even know how to make relationships. And, so that is to me that I can't really separate impairment from disability. To me, I'm disabled. I can't access those things precisely because of my impairment, not as a function of society. A society cannot provide me with enough accommodation to enable me to do that. And the other point being is that even, say for the sake of argument, certain things, you can be given certain accommodations so that you can access society. Wouldn't you rather not need or not want those accommodations or not have to rely on those accommodations? It puts you in a very kind of vulnerable position. You're having to rely on other people's goodwill. You're having to rely on the structures of society to be there to give you those accommodations. And that puts you in a really vulnerable position. And surely it would be just easier not to be so reliant on the goodwill of others to help you get by. And although if society, say, provides something for you that might make you then feel like you're no longer disabled and that you're fully included, someone could take those things away at any moment. Whereas so there's always this kind of realisation that you're still disabled, if you see what I mean. Even if they provided accommodation that you need, there's still this kind of realisation of I'm still disabled, and the only reason I don't feel so disabled right now is because I've been provided these things that could be taken away at any time. It's just I can't, and I know this whole distinction between impairment and disability was very much applied to those with physical disabilities, like those in a wheelchair. And I think that maybe for people with physical disabilities, like someone in a wheelchair needing a ramp, it's far more straightforward to apply the social model. Because if you provide a ramp, a person in a wheelchair can access society. But, however, there are certain places someone in a wheelchair can't access. For example, certain old buildings, for example, that they can't add a ramp because they're protected. People in a wheelchair, some people can't access them because they can't actually install lifts in them or anything like that because they're protected and they're not allowed to do that. So unfortunately, if you're in a wheelchair, there are certain places you can't access. So your disability can't be completely accommodated. Even with physical disability, this whole distinction between impairment and disability becomes rather kind of ambiguous. And I just don't really see the distinction between impairment and disability. I just feel it's been dreamed up by people who are minimally disabled, minimally impaired in the first place, and hence why it's a false distinction, because when you are more disabled and more impaired, it's really hard to kind of